What happens when a journey that lasted for months or even years and that you yearned for all your life comes to an end? When you had reached the last harbor, will you go back to your old life and live happy ever after? Or did you eventually get addicted to the endless freedom and independence and can't wait to untie the lines again? 4 years after the return from my first month-long journey, I came back again, sitting on a small rock in the Finnish archipelago in the middle of summer, breathing this worldwide unique nature and living my freedom once more. I want to take you with me on this month-long sailing trip to the world of the Scandinavian archipelagos. This impressive world made out of sea and rocks, of water and wind, of salt and earth. But I also want you to join me on a journey through history, back to the age of the Vikings. I can guarantee for the facts and experiences throughout my journey. For the historical facts though, I had to rely on different sources and experts, which did not always match. In that case, I chose the version better fitting to my story.
It's now 3 years ago and I have to go out again. I don't know how to say it to my wife, I don't know how to say it to my band, but I have to go.
And as so often in life, coincidence happened just then.
It was about 1 year ago when I walked through a famous Swedish furniture shop and I looked inside a decoration book and I first read about King Valdemar's sailing route, one of the oldest routes ever written down in the Baltic Sea. And I guess it was this moment where I got the idea of sailing this route. Now it's 1 year later, now I'm gliding down the Schlei and I'm really looking forward to the month and all the adventures ahead of me.
In the early 13th century, a literate monk sat behind Danish abbey walls and wrote the first real sailing description for the Baltic Sea. This itinerary was part of a cadaster belonging to King Valdemar II. It consists of 3 densely described pages in Latin script, naming 101 waypoints. These waypoints are forming a route from Åland-islands in southern Sweden to Reval, today's Tallinn in Estonia. I want to follow this oldest sailing itinerary for the Baltic Sea as closely to the original as possible. My journey will lead me through the archipelagos of eastern Sweden, up to the Åland-islands, then through the Finnish archipelago and all the way to Tallinn. But how did the monks acquire such knowledge? Obviously not from their own adventures at sea.
I'm Daniel Zwick. I'm a maritime archaeologist. The document was produced for the crown. Monasteries were often involved in the legal communications of the crown, especially for issuing privileges. Often there's no definite link to the activities of the monastery itself. Normally you don't find this kind of geographic information for a maritime context written down in a historical document of that time. The itinerary does not describe an actual voyage, but was basically a survey. But of course, the knowledge of sailors was tapped to gain this knowledge.
The orderer of the itinerary had obviously brought real seafarers to the abbey, so they could dictate the routes to the monks in person. I transferred the 101 waypoints laboriously to my modern navigation, and meanwhile found out that the route description is dating back to the Viking ages. Viking means pirate and is therefore only referring to a seafaring warrior. This is only a pretty small share of the Scandinavian population between the 8th and the 11th century, but it gave a whole epoch its name, an epoch that should change the world. And consequently, I chose Haithabu as the starting point for my journey. Haithabu lies at the gates of today's Schleswig. Located between the North and the Baltic Sea, deeply sheltered inside the waters of the Schlei, it became the most important place of maritime trade in Northern Europe. Here, at the crossings of many important far itineraries, people from all over the world came together. Folks from Franconia, Frisia and Scandinavia, Slavs and Byzantines settled here. Mostly they were slave traders, but also goldsmiths, carpenters, potters, fishermen, farmers and glassmakers lived here. The docks were as impressive as the extended grave fields. To protect the city, a mighty semicircular wall was built. Nevertheless, Haithabu was destroyed and burned down by a Slavic army so completely that the place was never repopulated again afterwards. But why aren't there any records or route descriptions from the Viking ages? Their age was one without books. Runes already existed, but just for scratching short notes in stones or pieces of wood. All sagas from which our Viking knowledge derives were written later, only based on hearsay.
Stories of long journeys and big adventures were told by the light of the fire. And there was no way to satisfy your curiosity. If you want to see by yourself what was told in the tales, you have to go on a journey on your own.
For the Christian chroniclers of the Middle Ages, a Norseman might have been just a pirate. But these journeys also had a different meaning. A man's reputation grew with his adventures, and the gained fame counted much in a world where people were judged more for their doings than for their status. A man who preferred to stay at home was disdained. In the Old Norse language, the adjective for domesticity, heimskru, therefore had a second meaning, namely dump.
Because nowadays there's no direct connection between Haithabu and the Schlei. I search for the nearest harbor here in Haddeby, and I will start my long journey and get aboard my sailing boat La Mer.
I had liked my Viking bride to join me on the journey, but even though the social role of the Viking women was very inventive for the Middle Ages, and even some high-ranking female Vikings had existed, it was mostly the men venturing on month-long raids or travels, while the women remained chief at home. And so, I also had to go all alone on the long journey to Tallinn, following the ancient Viking route. La Mer is a Dufour 2800, built in 1977, 9 meters long and 3 meters wide, strongly constructed for the Atlantic Ocean. Below decks there's a big saloon with a galley, a cozy forecabin for sleeping, a cramped and dark sanitary area, a pretty big diesel engine, and the electrics, including a VHF radio. The boat is steered by a tiller with optional automatic pilot, a roller furling genoa, 2 winches, 1 traveler, and just a few instruments. All is kept very simple. But even though I invested in 2 new sails, the sorrow remains if my old boat is going to make the long journey without problems. For that case, I added an inflatable kayak to get back home safely. But seriously, the little boat is for sections of the route which might not be navigational with my sailboat, and for excursions in the archipelagos. And in case the whole navigation instruments would fail, I included some reconstructed tools from the Viking ages.
And as usual for the Vikings and all old seafarer nations, we are waiting for the right wind. We're here in Schleimünde, the last German ground under my feet before we're going on the long tour to Sweden, and hopefully the wind will change during the night to south.
Well, now it's time to say goodbye from my home for a few months. For the long trip to southern Sweden, Lars embarks the ship. Until I'm not 100% confident with the boat, I get a better feeling this way. We make us comfortable on board and wait for a nightly wind shift. The wind is forecasted to shift from southeast to southwest overnight. We want to start at midnight, sailing this long leg to south of Langeland. There we enter the Great Belt, where we must cross 2 lanes for the professional shipping. North of Longland, we want to enter the Småland waters for a stopover at Stoppekøbing. Early morning, passing the Grön Sound and sailing another long leg of about 50 miles directly to Ystad.
Hey, cool, there are the white cliffs of Møn. I remember walking with my parents, and now sailing by with my own sailboat is a great feeling.
The emotions at the beginning of such a long journey are overwhelming. Absolutely everybody should make this experience once.
Claus, what did we see all the time for the last 40 miles?
Water and land.
And windmills. That's right. And that's how the Vikings navigated in this waters with landmarks, because you have some landmarks everywhere, so no need for astronomical navigation.
Hey Klaus, how did you find out that this old route had already been used by the Vikings?
Well, the first hint actually I found in the book in the Swedish furniture shop, where it was mentioned that the route might be much older. I found some interesting facts. I contacted the Danish National Archives if I can take a look at the original document. And they were very friendly and invited me to Copenhagen. And 2 weeks later, I was on my way. Right now, I'm just making my way through Copenhagen city traffic. And in 1 hour, I got an appointment at the Danish National Archives. They really want to show me the original document. And I just looked where the address is, and it's right in the middle of the castle. So I guess I have to put on a nice shirt.
My name is Michael Gelting, and I'm a senior research archivist here at the Danish National Archives. I'm our expert on our medieval collections. And what we have here is a manuscript which is usually called King Valdemar's Cadaster. This manuscript is somewhat of a mystery. It's very composite. It consists of a lot of different things. There are lists of all of the bishoprics and archbishoprics in the Catholic Church. There are lists of emperors and popes, lists of royal revenues, royal possessions. And these lists date from, roughly speaking, the first half of the 13th century. There are no signs of wear and tear. There are no medieval annotations. So what is the idea of this manuscript that seems never to have been used? All in the Middle Ages. And we don't know anything about its history before it turns up in the 17th century.
More than 400 kilometers of documents are stored here in the National Archives. This literary, touchable history made me shiver. I felt the breeze of long-gone ages. Touching the pages where a monk carefully handwrote the route description for my actual journey was truly impressive. In King Valdemar's Cadaster, there's another description of an old sea route.
That is a description of the sailing route from Ribe in southwest Jutland in Denmark to Akon in the Kingdom of Jerusalem in present-day Israel.
Here you can see the uncommon view on a wheel-shaped chart often used in medieval ages. On top are the bright and holy countries of the east, the Orients. And to the left, the dark and pagan countries of the north, the Aquilo. Jerusalem is seen as the center of the world. But we don't want to go this far today, and in the beginning darkness, we finally reach a harbor.
After leaving Schleimunde, we sailed in just 2 days to Ystad in Sweden, where I just took a shower. We had wonderful sailing conditions, always winds from the back, warm and sunny. Lars left me today to go back to Hamburg. Now I'm a single-handed sailor finally, and I think I have to get used to it a little bit. After leaving Schleimunde, my autopilot failed, and it was not the device. Luckily, it was just power consumption. Something failed in the power line from the panel to the autopilot. So I just took a cable directly, and we did not have to steer all the time.
We had some more small defects shortly after leaving port, and without Lars on board, I might have turned around directly near Schleimunde that night. But now everything is fixed and I can continue my voyage under sails. A steep coast with an odd formation of stones makes me curious. I am lucky, because the entrance to a small harbor is just being dredged after the winter, and I'm the first boat of the season.
I made a stop here in Kaseberga, because here's the biggest ever found stone ship in Sweden.
It is made of 59 rocks, each weighing tons, and was built between 500 and 800 after Christ. During the Viking Age, death was obviously regarded as a departure to new shores. So, strikingly often the ship-shaped stone settings had been built. Thousands of these so far discovered graves are witnessing the importance of the ships and life and death of a Viking seafarer. In many sizes, from 2 to, like as seen here, 67 meters, the deceased were laid to rest. But the graves were also often left empty to honor travelers who lost their life on faraway raids. There are also monuments made in the Bronze Age about 3,000 years ago, partly to scale with the known longboats of the Viking Age. That only enhances the importance of seafaring for whole Scandinavia. Without these powerful boats, there would have never existed any Vikings as pirates or traders. And, remarkably, there are no settings of this kind in England or France. But people were not only buried in these stone ships, but sometimes also in their own boats. In the rocks of Kaseberga, carvings known from Stone Age graves had been found. Obviously, this unique place in that awesome landscape had inspired many people to have a grave here. But there's yet another interpretation for the stone setting, namely the whole complex functioning as a solar calendar. I just want to point out here that the path and position of the sun was a big matter during the Viking Age and before. Without a compass, which should be invented later, and without the stars, which can be hardly seen during the bright Scandinavian summer, the sun remains the only means of orientation on the open sea. Due to bad weather conditions, I'm stuck for 2 days in Kaseberga, because when you spot surfers outside of the harbor walls, you should take it as a serious warning signal. Actually, I like such a break in the early stage of a journey, because it offers you some time to relax from the exhausting phases of planning and preparation, and to get keen on the exciting month at sea. I have once more untied the lines to land and life, to experience the endless freedom of single-handed sailing again.
Ich bin so glücklich wie ein Kind, dass ich abgehauen bin.
It begins with the long passage crossing the bight of Hanö to Utlängan, the starting point of the itinerary, starting with rain,
1 meter waves and no wind.
followed by increasing broad-reaching winds, and later with lots of sun and great sailing conditions.
While I'm hanging here on one of my favorite places on board, I'm thinking about the motivation of the Vikings to raid other folks, and there are many theories about that. There was too less space in the small fjords in Norway especially, or too less food for the growing population, or that only the firstborn son has the right of inheritance and stuff. But I think partly true, but I guess the most reason for this is because they could. They got the boats, they got the navigational knowledge, they got the fighting power. And I think one can ask why the first one sailed away, but after his return with goals and, let's say, beautiful woman from France, everybody in the age of 18, 19, 20 or something, who got some friends, who knows how to sail a boat, wants to go as well.
But were the Vikings really those bloodthirsty warriors we know from so many descriptions? Definitely, the raids to the west were characterized by weapons force. But did the Christian chroniclers not also have their own interest in an exaggerated description of the murderous pagan warriors?
I'm Paul Wilson, and I'm the manager of the Reval Viking Center. And we are on the island of Reval in the southernmost part of Finland, in the archipelago here. When the Vikings went to the west, they much more went to war and used force. But here in these parts of the world, it was usually peaceful. And they were traders mainly, and for sure there has been also fighting, but mainly it was peaceful trading with goods from what is today the Scandinavian countries that were brought out to the coastline where the Vikings traded with mainland peoples to then get new goods that they could then take through the eastern route through the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea and even as far away as the Mediterranean from here also. So usually the main export goods from what is today Finland was furs and skins of all sorts. We traded also with firewood and dried meat, dried fish also a lot we sold, and even lamp oil was made here on these islands from seal fat. So these were, you could say, the main export goods. Then we imported to Finland. We imported spices and precious metals and clothing. And the eastern route goes from here very very far. We even have found on this island coins that were struck during the Viking Age in North Africa. So trading was, you could say, very international already during the Viking Age here also.
Yes, and now we're sailing with my boat on this very, very old route. It's a cool feeling.
Once you had passed the Danish islands, another world reveals itself towards Sweden and Norway, which are two big empires in the north, mostly unknown in our part of the world.
The famous annalist Adam von Bremen wrote this in his Descriptio Insularum Aquilonis. 200 years after the Vikings, the islands of the Aquilo, the pagan north, were still feared and avoided. Following the coast of South Sweden from Falsterbro and heading east, like we do, one reaches Åland. This island is the outermost island of a whole archipelago world.
And here is a good example of a surprisingly appearing underwater rock, if you are not carefully following the voyage.
Well, I think the name Åland mentioned in the old document is more for the region than for a specific harbor.
There are lots of places named after types of ships here, like Kuggaviken, Cockbite, or Knarholmen, Knarr Islands. It is possible that whole fleets of different types of ships had anchored here, waiting for favorable winds. I chose Stenshamn as my first harbor on King Valdemar's sailing route. Enjoying my first contact to the world of the Swedish archipelagos, I'm also waiting for fair winds. On the horizon, one can see the well-known silhouette of Fuglklipper. As the sun starts shining again, I have an idea.
Yeah, I'm thinking about making the passage from Estonia to Gotland without help of instruments, maybe. And to get fit for it, I still got some month. And I start with a small experiment.
What we have here is a gnomon throwing a shadow and a circle around it. There are exactly 2 moments during the day where the shadow intersects with the circle.
This happens in the morning and in the late afternoon, which is now. Tomorrow I must get up early to check the second intersection. When I connect these two intersections, I get a direct east-west line. It doesn't matter how big you make the circle or how long your shadow casting rod is. You only need to mark the two intersection points to draw a perfect east-west line. And of course, you need time, which I'm lacking the next morning. Okay, the shadow isn't already there, but I need to go. I got a long way before me, so we go with the principle. I guess maybe I will land here. I'll make a line, a straight line between the 2 points in that direction. There's my north. I checked with my compass and it looks good. Just expecting the sun to be exactly in the south, 12 o'clock noon, is simply not precise enough. I start from Stenshamn, following an extreme narrowed buoy channel. My guidebook advises me to carefully follow the buoyancy, as the channel tends to send up and only has a depth of 2 meters. I will try my luck, otherwise I'd have to go all the way around. The passage turns out to be broad enough, but the readout of my echo sounder displays the minimal depth several times. My keel is probably slipping very, very slowly through the ground. It shall not be that shallow again for the whole rest of the journey, and after finishing the passage and following the itinerary, I start thinking. The route to Estonia would be much shorter, taking a direct course over the open sea, instead of following the described route. So why is the expeditionary army of King Valdemar, with its big amount of ships, making this detour? Lacking a compass, which only later found its way aboard of seagoing ships, the means of navigation were limited during that time, and landmarks are missing on the way over the open sea. A single ship might find its way by using stars and sun as navigational aids, but maneuvering a whole fleet, also through the night, is a different task. Even more, the part of the Baltic Sea between Gotland and Estonia can get pretty rough, which I will experience later on my way back home. Additionally, there's also the dreaded island of Ösel, today's Saaremaa, directly on the way. For the Danish, Ösel was a bit like the small, unconquerable village of Asterix and Obelix. They could even win some fights, but after that, nobody ever volunteered to stay there. The Estonian Vikings were feared pirates, fighting against their Norwegian counterparts on the island of Saaremaa, as actual ship finds are proving. Saaremaa is also supposed to be the location of the legendary fire island Thule from the Norse mythology. Big craters from meteorites here could indeed prove this theory. Definitely I will have a look at Saaremaa on my way back, but for now, like King Valdemar, making a big circle around the island. Indeed, he was taking the detour through the sheltered skerries and managed to get his fleet reliable, complete, and at the same time to Estonia. His first doing after the arrival was the destroying of the old Estonian fortification on the hill of Lindernisse. It is told in tales that heaven opens its gates during the fight and Denmark receives its flag, the Dannebrog, from which all Scandinavian flags descended. After the victory, a new castle was instantly built here, which gave name to the capital of Estonia, Tallinn, because the Estonian words Taani and Linn in combination have the meaning of Danish castle. And this castle is the destination of my journey, even if it seems so far away like the moon to me now. But long sailing journeys are following the principle of making reliable short distances every day to reach even faraway destinations. From Åland till Kalmar, 10 Växjö. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm on the way to Kalmar. I got a nice breeze from the back and with my parasail up, so I'm traveling with 5 to 6 knots. The distance mentioned in the old document, it's named as 10 Växjö. This Växjö is a very individual measurement, so it means how long can a group of people rowing do it until they need to be changed. And okay, this depends on currents and weather and the team itself. I'm just a little bit sorry that I didn't choose a red, white Viking style for my parasail, but I thought of it too late. The total distance of my route from Åland to Tallinn equates 113 Växjö units. One interesting fact about this area here's where the North Sea herring and the Baltic herring
are separated, so there's a kind of border. If you are fishing now, the fish might look different to all the days before.
Abeam, you can see Bergquara.
A harbour and trading place known since the Viking Age. There's nothing left to look at today, but the ghosts of the past still seem to sense my passing. With only a few miles left of Kalmar, the wind suddenly shifts around 100 degrees, with gusts up to 7 before. I have some difficulties in getting my parasail down, and it takes many hours of tacking to reach Kalmar in the darkness. But I'm taking this as a challenge by the Viking gods of the seas, Njord and Ægir, to test my abilities to sail in the wakes of the Norsemen. And after this encounter, they leave me in peace all the way to Tallinn.
Good morning from Kalmar, the second waypoint. Behind me you can see the Kalmar Sound, which caused me so much trouble yesterday.
Kalmar is one of the oldest towns in Sweden. In the middle of the 13th century, trading was blossoming in the city, which was very close to the German Hanse.
During the Viking Age, Kalmar was an important settlement. Kalmar actually means rich grounds near the Sound.
In this castle, the union between Sweden, Denmark and Norway was signed. And my route also has a connection to Kalmar. I asked Michael Gelting when and where King Valdemar's Kadester had appeared for the first time.
The history of the manuscript is quite interesting. The first sign of it is that it belonged to Stefanius, famous Danish historian. In the late 17th century, it was sold to a Swedish collector and ultimately ended up in the Royal Library in Stockholm.
But the Danish also possessed many documents the Swedes were interested in. And so, in 1936, a big exchange was initiated.
When one of the things that were returned to Denmark was this little manuscript.
I let the northerly wind weaken, and 2 days later, in the early hours of the day, I'm on my way again. I want to leave the Kalmar Sound with its unpredictable wind acceleration zones as fast as possible. But instead of wind, I get dense fog. I must be damned careful to not collide with one of the many navigation marks here. And even the big bridge to Åland could easily be missed in this grey in grey. The Viking mythology would be worth making a dedicated movie. In this production, I would just like to tell a few selected stories for an overview in a loose order.
The Viking world consists of 9 worlds. One of these is Niflheim,
Which are my past right now.
cold, foggy, and centered by a whirling maelstrom. It was located from immemorial time next to its counterpart, the flaming and lava-spitting Muspelheim. Here stands Surtra, the blazing giant, and waits steadfastly for his role at the end of all times, the Ragnarok.
But I almost feel the sun. She couldn't be that far away anymore.
And on it goes with a good sailing wind to the next waypoint in the itinerary, the immaculate but uninteresting harbour Refsudden on the peninsula of Skerries.
After leaving Refsudden, because there wasn't much to see, my brave boat now finds its way under autopilot to Valu, which is the entrance to the incredible world of the archipelago. It must be harder to find decades ago, but today there's a factory visible for miles.
Always in watching distance is the Blaujungfrau, the Blue Virgin. This island is doomed since ages and was always avoided by seafarers. Originally, she was named Blåkulla, Blue or Dark Mountain. It was told that this was a place where the witches met with the devil. Only later, the island was renamed to Blaujungfrau to make it more attractive. On this, even until today, unsettled island, one of the many mysterious stone labyrinths I will find along my route is located. But now I'm drawn with all my might in the archipelago I had missed so much, and I wish I had one of the fast Viking ships which could reach a speed 3 or 4 times faster than my La Mer is capable of. But finally, near the wood plant, I'm entering this peaceful world. Sheltered from the open sea, you can still find ships at anchor, like hundreds of years ago. I'm gliding over smooth waters, and after some dreamlike hours, I'm after boy in Paskalavik. I'm releasing a big breath. And finally, I'm back in the landscape, which came to me in my dreams for the last 4 years. These images were the reason to grab the illustrated book at all. and were the beginning of my plans for this journey.
Auf der Suche nach der Freiheit hab ich mich oft verirrt. Die Flucht in meine eigene kleine Welt hat sich deshalb so bewährt. Ich laufe dann am Horizont vorbei, ohne Druck und ohne Geld, in meine kleine Welt.
And I'm already feeling the endless light of the summer evenings here in the north and beginning to feel like a part of this unique nature. By the way, there's also a history of creation in the Norse mythology.
In the melting waters between the icy world Niflheim and the blazing world Muspelheim, life began in shape of the enormous giant Ymir, who was equally male and female. With him, a cow rose from the ice, nourishing him with floods of milk. This cow hungrily licked the salty ice, and so Buri came to the world, the ancestor of all gods. Meanwhile, Ymir's offspring grew under his arms and legs. Buri married one of these giantesses, and 2 generations later, Odin and his 2 brothers were born into this void and boring world. So, they decided that it was time for a big change. They saw no other way than striking Ymir to death. His blood became the seas, his flesh the land, his bones became the mountains, and his teeth the islands and rocks. The firmament was the inside of his skull, where still today you can see the sparks of Muspelheim flying, and which is carried by 4 dwarves. And the clouds are his brains. Who knows what thoughts are still taught there today? And so, the gods became their worlds. Asgard was home for the martial Azir, and Vanaheim for the peaceful Vanes. Because everything in the world of the north has its counterpole.
The next day sees me paddling, because the island of Runnö, mentioned in the itinerary, is directly opposite.
I couldn't go with my sailboat, so I took the kayak to go to Runnö. This island has been settled for over 1,000 years. In the 19th century, 100 people lived here, and now everybody's dead and gone. So mostly seal hunters, farmers, and pilots. The destiny of the island is like so many on my way now. Real estate prices had gone up in the sky, and these islands are only used for summer guests and summer holidays.
Following the old route further, I'm passing many of these holiday residences. The fairway is constantly tightening, and in parts the voyage remembers me of slalom tracks. 4 years ago, I had lots of respect regarding this passage, but today I'm really enjoying the trip, while the wind is softly pushing me through the archipelago.
Yeah, without my experience in 2014 when I sailed here, it would have been not so easy, if possible at all, to do this because I needed all my concentration for the difficulties of the area. Now I feel secure, so I can spend some time filming, which is actually a lot of.
I want to stay in the beautiful nature overnight and drop my anchor in the bight of Solberganesse. I have all I need in my mobile home on board of the ship. Before starting my journey, I had often wondered what had made the Viking ships so special. For some answers on that matter, I drove to Denmark.
Hey, I'm here at the Viking Ships Museum in Roskilde, where you find the largest collection of old Viking ships all over the world.
In the fjord of Roskilde, fragments of old ships were washed ashore or found in fishing nets frequently. That had made archaeologists curious, and they could dig out 5 Viking ships in 1962. These ships were dated around 1070 after Christ. They were loaded with stones and grounded in the fjord to shelter Roskilde, Denmark's centrum of power then, against raids. Roskilde then could only be reached by a small alternate fairway, which was much easier to defend. In the museum, the salvaged parts of the wrecks were integrated in steel frames to give an impression of the shape and size of the original ships. The length of the ships varies from 11 meters up to a found of 36 meters length and a square sail in the size of 200 square meters on just one mast. A crew of 100 sailors were aboard on these ships made of oak, which still only had a draft of around 1 meter. The invention of the seaworthy and fast sailing ships was the basic requirement for the massive Scandinavian expansion during the Viking Age. The form with the double ends was very useful during casting off and combat maneuvers. But against some claims, it was not possible to sail in both directions. But one thing was much more important. The relative flat keel was allowing to bring the boat ashore on beaches, so there was no need of deep water harbors. In addition, the flat keel made it possible to drag the ships overland using tree trunks, which was a necessary technique on the trading routes over Russian rivers. And so many ships had names like Plank Ox or Bear of the Rolls. But most of the descriptions compared the ships with fast animals. Names like Horse of the Wind, Wolf of the Rivers or Sea Wolf were not only related to the use, but even more to the beauty of the ships. It all began with the building of a clinker-constructed ship made of wood, as advancement of a dugout or a fur boat. The first rock carvings of these boats were found on Gotland. Was the cradle of Scandinavian shipbuilding located here? But only between the 6th and 8th century the sail was established in Scandinavia, which then made larger distances possible. It was possible to make speeds up to 40 knots, which was unreached by larger sailboats even in modern times. All ships of the Viking Age were steered with a rudder mounted on the right side of the stern. Therefore, the term starboard stands for the right side, while the back of the helmsman was directed to the left, in German still called backboard. As a decoration of the warship's bow, dragon heads or carved heads in forms of animals or humans were used. These were removed when reaching the home port and also when traveling to Iceland. But in Roskilde, the ship founds are not only exhibited, but are also originally reconstructed in a workshop.
They actually built boats which are able to sail, and they sail to Iceland and over to Dublin, and so this is really serious work here around.
The biggest reconstruction is the 30 meters long Sea Stallion from Glendalough. This ship was rebuilt using traditional tools and techniques of the Viking Age. Its longest journey went all the way to Ireland, where the original ship was once built.
We have seen that the Vikings were able to build ships like the Sea Stallion there behind me, and also sailed on open waters. But the question is, how did they navigate?
I'm interviewing Espen Jessen on that matter, the captain of the Otter, a reconstruction of the wreck number 1, a knurr built for the high seas. It was these type of ships which made the passages to Iceland, Greenland and North America possible, because it had the necessary storing room for goods and livestock.
The Viking ships in general are specific for the need they made. So you had cargo ships and you had warships. And of course warships had to be fast and they had to carry lots of soldiers. Whereas the cargo ships had to carry a lot of cargo, of course, but with as few people as possible, so you didn't have to pay as many salaries. Which also means that they are slower, because you don't need to outrun or be faster than the others, because you arrived at the market one day before the others. It was not that important. You just had to arrive safely. So the cargo ships are much more seaworthy, but they're not quite as fast as the sort of the long ship. I mean, I'm sailing a cargo ship with the museum, and usually we have this joke that the guys sailing the long ship say, yeah, my ship's faster than your ship, and say, yeah, but mine's fatter than yours. So.
A good argument I will remember for the future. My fat ship with a beam of 3 meters is not really fast, but offers a lot of room to live in instead. But with this tight buoyancy, this might become more of a handicap.
1, 2. Klammerskär.
After leaving the so nicely sheltered inner skerries by passing Klammerskär, I'm in the area of the outer skerries again. The open sea is dominating here, and I'm lucky that the weather conditions are improving. With strong easterly winds, this passage would be a long way from being as idyllic as today.
And it goes on the Viking route, passing the Bait of Fitjahammer.
A dream of a passage with the sun shining, so sheltered in the archipelago.
dominated by a nuclear plant. And we just move on.
Lacking wind, I'm using my outboard engine, which might seem unusual. But the extra engine gives me an additional feeling of safety, and on top of that, relieves my old diesel on longer trips. But now, what are the facts about the speed of the Viking ships?
Yeah, well, actually, with the Viking ships, with the square sail is really efficient with a beam reach from the side or behind it. And with the otter that I'm most used to sailing, we plan our trips with an average speed of 4 to 5 knots. That's the average speed on it. We can sail faster, and the whole ship itself is 26 tons. So as soon as we start sailing faster than 8 to 10 knots, we can feel that the pressure and everything is sort of mounting a little. When we got back from Scotland, we had a gale force wind in the back, and we were surfing in between Denmark and Norway, and that actually funnels the waves in. So we were doing like 4-meter waves, and we were doing 10 to 12 knots. And we actually had it up surfing, where we twice saw the GPS just hitting 14 knots and coming back down again. And I can guarantee you that boat is not built for sailing 12 to 14 knots, and I hope I'll never do it again.
Definitely, small trading boats were able to reach speeds which most of us sailors can only dream of. The special shape of the hull, a flexible construction, and the unique planking gave these boats the ability to start gliding on the water. I can only dream of this kind of speed. But after a while I finished this windless passage and am entering this incredible world made of rocks and sea again. Only in the middle of May I see other lift-on ships on my journey. Until now, I was constantly traveling on my own.
Yeah, loneliness is a thing this tour. Last time I was happy to get away, but this time, it's not that easy. When I'm working, when I'm filming, actually I don't think about it. It's because, or the matter why I'm here. But if I have breaks and even more in bigger cities, I feel pretty much alone.
But for a few days, the loneliness now comes to an end. After Vinö, I reach the small harbor of Klintemala and travel by bus to Stockholm to meet my wife. First thing is celebrating our 10th wedding day anniversary, and then she joins for 2 days on board. Sailing is not so much hers, but we try it time by time again. This reminds me of another wonderful tale of the Viking gods.
Since Odin struck the giant Ymir to death, an adamant dispute manifested between the gods and the giants, all living in Jotunheim. One day, the ice giantess Skadi comes from there to Asgard because the Aesir has just killed her father. She now claims a husband, and even more, someone to make her laugh again. But that happens only when Loki, the fraud god of the Aesir, ties his testes to the beard of a bulky goat for a tug of war. Now this finally made Skadi laugh and shines a light on the humour of the Vikings. The selection process of her new husband is limited to a view of different feet, and of all men she chose Njord, god of the seas. This marriage can only go wrong. They agreed in spending the few summer months by the sea, where the squealing seagulls kept Skadi from finding any sleep, and the rest of the time in her homeland, the rocky Jotunheim, where Njord cannot get used to the howling of the wolves and snores so loud that his wide open mouth is used as a chamber pot.
What I really like about these Viking tales is the faultiness and mortality of their gods. Despite their extraordinary abilities, this gives them a touch of humanity. But back to reality, my delicate ice giantess is astonishingly happy with the good weather conditions, and we are enjoying our togetherness. Long months of separation are still lying in front of us.
I don't think that I could find a better way to spend my time than spending it all on you.
Near Vinö, we continue the journey on the old sailing route. This island, just like Kalmar, was mentioned 2 times in the itinerary. One of these things that struck me as odd during the phase of planning. Obviously, 2 alternate routes were described. One going over the open sea and one following the sheltered route through the archipelago, which I'm using right now. I make a mental note to later ask an expert. Until then, I can only underline what Michael Gelting told me in the Danish National Archives.
There are actually breaks in the sailing route where it is impossible to say that this was a way you would sail with a ship. Sometimes it just goes into describing that here are a number of islands that are called so and so. The description is not so detailed that you could really use it for navigating.
It indeed took some time until I was able to form a sailable route with the given waypoints. But this also had a positive side effect.
Without the route description, I would have missed many bays and anchorings because it's just not so obvious when you look in the charts or on the tablet. And and if you zoom in and then you see, okay, there's a chance I can go there.
I had passed the spectacular narrow passage near Sparø once, but had never set foot on the island. But by steering carefully into the hidden bight of the island, one can reach stunning mooring places at the rocks, perfectly located to further explore the island.
Hey, I'm here on the island of Sparø. I just jogged 20 minutes up here to this so-called beacon. And as it said already in the 16th century, some fire was held out of the window to guide the ships. And you really have a great view all over the archipelago from here.
Sparø lies in between the archipelagos of Misterholt and Tjust, a kingdom of about 10,000 islands. In this meshwork made of granite and underwater rocks, many ships had run aground. For me, the narrow passage near Sparø marks the true beginning of the world of the Swedish archipelagos, giving almost perfect shelter from here up to Stockholm. I'd love to stay here for a few days, but I need to drop off my wife at Västervik so she can catch a flight back. But the next, now again lonesome, days and nights, I'm planning to stay outside in the nature. But being silent again is now an easy task in between this awesome world of the islands. On the old island of Stedsholm, with its here typical tower, specially built for pilots, I get a perfect feeling of an arrival. Not only in a geographic, but also in an emotional way. And an incredible ease starts to spread in my soul. The days are endless, and it is already too bright to see any stars at night. In the morning, I'm leaving Stedsholm, where a last descendant of the pilots is still living. A nice breeze is promising wonderful archipelago sailing. I am passing Halmare, an ancient farmers' settlement, where still today many farmhouses can be found. During the migration period and later in the Viking Age, it was here that an important travel route, coming from Ireland over Gothenburg, crossing the whole of Sweden, met the Baltic Sea. This route then even went further, either in northerly direction, following my route, or directly eastward through Russia and as far as the Orient. This is the reason for the similarity of the old Irish and Swedish languages. And Christianity found its way to Scandinavia also by following this route. At the crossroads of both routes, many oriental coins and pieces of jewelry had been found. Hence, it was a good trading place for the Vikings, or some centuries later, to restock the supplies of King Valdemar's fleet. And my supplies are now also running thin. I plan to visit the interesting smokehouse of Laxboa on the island of Grindö. It usually offers an own dock for customers, but I am a little early in the season, so everything is still closed. I set sails again to further proceed on my way through this entanglement of water and rocks. In former times, without sea charts, this was a task only doable with a pilot. But how to imagine a pilot during the age of the Vikings?
I think the Vikings actually did use local people to show them the directions. At the end of the Viking Age and the beginning of the Middle Ages, there are texts that if you take a local pilot to show you the way, you should pay him so he could get back home as a minimum.
Threats were obviously an unwise choice.
To our knowledge, they didn't have charts or really written descriptions more than a very general overview, go to that island and turn west or stuff like that. So I think you would have some very overall descriptions of where to go, and then if you needed to go closer to the islands and in the sort of skerry, between the skerries, you would have to have someone that knows the area. Today in the Scandinavian language, a pilot is called a los. And that's derived from two words. One is a lod, which is sort of lead weight you use to sound the depth with in a boat. And the other word it comes from is ledsage. And that's a person accompanying you to show you that area. So it's the person accompanying you and he's still having the lead depth sounder. That's a los, which today, even 1,000 years later, is the word for a pilot.
And I made myself a good pilot by finding one of the most beautiful mooring places of my journey here in the Tjust archipelago. Tjust means violence in the Old Norse language, but seems to stand here for violently beautiful.
Hin und wieder schleich ich mich einfach davon, für diesen einen Zweck. Und wenn ich's aus der Ferne dann betrachte, will ich hier auch nicht mehr weg. Ich laufe dann am Horizont vorbei, ohne Druck und ohne Geld, in meine kleine Welt, in meine kleine Welt.
I'm just making my daily route planning here, and I just realized how far I've come already. So I started in Utlengan all the way up, and now I'm here. And in my efforts to follow King Valdemar's sailing route as close as possible, I'm always looking for suitable harbors or anchor baits, because not all places mentioned are good for my boat. And so I came here. I had a wonderful evening at the fireplace. It was really, really great here. All alone, just me and Mother Nature. And next point will be Torø, where 8 months before I started dreaming of this trip.
And here's a story. After visiting the National Archives in Copenhagen, I proceeded with my car directly to the Swedish archipelago. I wanted to look for traces of the old sailing route. Already in 1996, the route was featured as a touristic attraction. But here's a big problem. Without a boat, it is nearly impossible to set a foot on the skerries or getting even close to the water, because, as already mentioned, many properties are privately owned. Or they are national reserves, needing hours of hiking with a backpack and a tent. But I could find two ways, which I now want to recommend to the non-sailors here, if you want to explore the world of the archipelagos.
I'm here on a small islet in the archipelago of Loftehammer, and I just rented out this nice kayak because I wanted to try how it works in the skerries inside this world of islands, and it's really great. You can go everywhere, and it's going to be a central element of my journey.
Coming from the waterside, it is very easy to get on the islands, and the so-called Swedish allemansrätten allows everybody to trespass or having an overnight stay, if you are not in direct sight of a house or in a fenced area. And a kayak is the ideal means of transportation. But there's one other possibility, and foreseeing this, I put a mountain bike in the back of my car.
I'm here on the island of Torø, and behind me you see a passage which must be part of that old sailing route. And just a few minutes ago, 2 sailboats passed by, so it's good to see it's still in use. By the way, it was not easy to get here. My car is parked 7 kilometers away. I went 5 kilometers by bike and then walked the rest. So you can see how much of a privilege it is to be sailing.
And here I sat at a small part of the sailing route, making plans to pass here next year, imagining me already sailing through the strait on board of La Mer. But I was also full of doubts. Will I success to make the break at home, get my finances in order, and will no unforeseen events spoil my plans? But I already knew from 2014 how to act properly. Namely, first fixing a definite date for the departure, and second, having the bullhead to make that happen. Because ideally, nobody near you will really be happy seeing you leaving for a few months. So you must realize your dreams painfully lonesome in the beginning. But when you come back from your journey, everybody advises and compliments you for your courage. And, also very proud of me now, I'm tacking through the narrow strait near Torøy some month later. Always good when a plan works out. I'm leaving the Tjust for the Great Archipelago. Both areas are known as real graveyards for ships, which comes as no surprise given the quality of the early sea charts, and had seen many desperate fights during the Viking Age. Already in the 12th century stood a cross here, 16 meters high and presumably built to honor the Crusaders. It had disappeared during the centuries, but in 1994 a replica was solemnly erected here, again leading the way for us seafarers. Torøy also has an old seafarer cemetery located in the middle of the forest. Seamen who died at sea far from their homes were not allowed to be buried on regular cemeteries. There were fears that infectious diseases might somehow get in the earth. And during the church services, so was the old faith, could be transferred to the locals.
The wind is against me, it's even stronger near the land, and I got the currents against me. So I decided to pass Kværdy from the outside, and now I'm on the open sea. And yeah, there is Kværdy, and I will go in the archipelago again after tacking.
Do you see the red buoy over there? That's my waypoint for entering the archipelago.
And from Askøy to Kværdy.
And instantly I wonder how the Viking ships behaved when tacking, which means sailing against the wind.
With the square sails on the Viking ships, a lot of people think that they can only go downwind, but they can actually tack up against the wind. And usually we say that if the wind comes that way, you can have 60 degrees to each side. So from one tack to another, you have 120 degrees. And then you have a little leeway because they do slide a little in the water. They're not quite as a modern boat with a keel. With the Ottar, we once sailed from Heidebu in northern Germany to Gdansk in Poland. And on our way back from Gdansk, we had to tack for 3 days to position ourselves along the coast. And then the wind picked up from the right direction. So in the 12 hours while the wind was from the right direction, we made more distance than we did in the three days of tacking.
This sounds familiar to me, because the angle of tacking of my La Mer is not much better. The Viking ships had a single mast, fixed by shrouds and stays made of hemp or seal leather. A rectangular sail was set here on a movable spreader. The foot of the sail could be handled with 2 lines. While tacking, the tack of the sail was fixed on the windward side with the help of a wooden boom, the so-called bitias. For these times, it was a very inventive piece of sailing equipment. Heavy wooden blocks with 3 circular-shaped sockets were fixed on the starboard and the port side of the ship. Here the bitias was located, with the sail fixed on its opposite side. These 3 sockets even made finer tuning possible. Experiments with replicas had proven the effectivity of this gear by improving the performance on a close reach. It is really fascinating to find these wooden blocks here on the wrecks in Roskilde. History almost gets alive.
No more waves, but very unsteady winds. Ahead lies Hallsund. I guess I will need my diesel to pass.
Patience seemed to be a necessary virtue during the Viking Age. Sailing never took place at night, and an overnight stay was prepared on the dry land. The flat keel made it easily possible pulling the boats on land and having a campfire. But how can one imagine a group of maritime traders during the Viking Age?
That's a good question. We don't know for a fact or everything about what kind of or what size of boats they used, but we have here on the area a replica of a finding from Finland that was found in Lapuri, and that was about 8.5 meters or 9 meters approximately.
The ship so had approximately the size of Mylamere. But 8 to 10 people were underway on the long journey to the east. But another aspect also had been taken under consideration.
During the Viking Age, you had to drag the boat over dry land between rivers, and then it can't be that heavy. It has to maybe weigh 2.5, 3 tons, maybe maximum.
For the transportation of the boats, wooden rudders were then pushed through the holes in the hull, making the carriage of the ships possible by rolling them over logs of wood.
They usually went with maybe 10 smaller vessels, and then they could help each other also on these parts where they had to drag it over dry land.
And so also were able to form a better defensive. In the Halsø one is greeted by this lady. The Vikings have a reputation for their dissolute moral conduct during medieval times. But it also seems plausible that wild fantasies took hold of the monks during their transcription to picture the Vikings as sinful pagans. But was trading a safe business at all, being underway in the unknown with precious goods? Or were there some kinds of peaceful trading arrangements?
There were some sorts of arrangements when the Vikings went from different marketplaces in what is today the Scandinavian countries, to keep it safe and to guarantee it also for merchants from other parts of the world also to be safe and be able to trade, because it was in everybody's best interest.
With Barosund, I arrive at yet another waypoint on my route. In the 13th century, a settlement of the Hanse already existed here in this bight. And later, a pilot station was built at the narrow passage, where the boats could easily be stopped and searched.
Fascinating to imagine the same scenery 800 years ago.
I am proceeding further in northerly direction, passing through many national preserves. Together with St. Anna, Gryt and Tjust, all are part of the archipelago of Östergötland, formed by the biggest amounts of beautiful islands in all of Sweden. They feature an extraordinary but also sensible fauna. Farming, fishing and hunting had disappeared, giving room for tourists in the summer. The blue algae have increased and are replacing the seaweed. Some species of fish are almost gone. But slowly the quality of the water is increasing again, and the visitors here are taking good care of the nature. The islands here had not been split up in small parcels of land, because mighty landlords had taken care of that. And by this, luckily, the nature had been preserved. Entering the island of Veggin, for example, has been forbidden for almost 50 years now, to leave the forest untouched. Full of luck to be underway in this awesome area, I'm spending my days in perfect satisfaction. And, by the way, it is only middle of May.
Veggin.
Träumst davon seit Jahren, sagst dir irgendwann, ja irgendwann ist es so weit. Und doch bist du noch niemals losgefahren. Kinder, Haus und Geld stahlen deine ganze Zeit. Doch jeden Tag bist du die Uhr, die lauter tickt. Du musst raus, sonst wirst du hier verrückt. Lass los, nimm dir endlich Zeit für dich. Lass einfach los, denn dein Leben wartet nicht.
25 degrees, middle of May. It's so hot here on board. This is the only shadowy place. And yeah, as I'm always saying, everything over 2 knots has to be sailed.
I'm not so sure about still making 2 knots.
All of these archipelagos could have an own documentation, and I'm always afraid that I cannot see everything, but it's not possible to go to each and every island. But I've seen really cool places here. Now I'm going over to another place mentioned in the old description. It's called Rotsundet. It must be anywhere around here.
Come on, mate. Only after the journey I discovered that the entry of Ulsund in the itinerary has been translated wrong with Östersund. It is supposed to be Ulsundet. A little difference of a few miles in some islands, making a big difference here in the archipelago. And following that directions you will pass Rotsundet very exactly and not just any way near. In the Aspjöfjärden one can find the famous buoy of Kesaran, decorated with a crown. And even if it brings big shame on someone, this crown disappears from time to time. Before reaching Aktoprak, and with it also a kind of end of my first leg through the archipelagos, it is a perfect time for another Viking tale.
We already know the worlds of the gods, Asgard and Vanaheim, the icy Niflheim, the flaming Muspelheim, and the world of the giants, Jotunheim. Now, 2 more worlds are coming along. Ljösulfheim, the land of the light elves.
I already hated them in Lord of the Rings.
And Svartalfheim, the land of the dark elves, better known as dwarves. Dwarves are the inventors and craftsmen in the Nordic mythology, and they have made some pretty important inventions. Here is the story. Now we all know the manic god of mischief, Loki. Well, one day, in a mischievous mood, he completely clips the golden hair of Thor's wife Sif. Thor, son of Odin, is equally strong as simple-minded and leaves no room for discussion. Loki must deliver a replacement. His only option are the dwarves, but he does not want to beg. So he comes up with a contest. Which is the most skilled tribe of the dwarves? A few weeks later, the inventions were introduced in Asgard. Thor's wife gets a wig made of hundreds and thousands of renewable golden filaments and is even more beautiful. Thor gets his famous hammer, Mjolnir, which once thrown always hits its target, is indestructible and always comes right back to him.
But I really dig one invention, Skidbladnir, a ship which can be folded to a very small size, but at sea offers space for all the Viking gods. In addition, it's making winds to always come from the back, and therefore is a real sailor's dream. The meaning of Skidbladnir is put it together from wooden boards.
Herewith, I give you the name Raudebladnir.
Which means built out of red pieces or leaves.
I think it's possible that they might find me a bit creepy here.
To not furtherly increase this impression, it is time for a little return to civilization. I am now underway for exactly 1 month, mostly in the nature, where many harbors are still closed for the season. So I must take advantage of the luxury offered here. Also, I'm running slowly out of supplies and my boat needs some care. In short, I need a harbor in a bigger city. And I have already an idea. But I must do something in advance, which is reasoned by the Scandinavian geology. The heavy weight of the huge glaciers had pressed whole Scandinavia downwards during the Ice Age. Now these glaciers are gone and the Baltic Sea developed out of their melting water. Freed from the weight of the ice, Scandinavia is still slowly rising again. 800 years ago, the land here was almost 3 meters deeper underwater and a sailing route passed between these 2 islands. Nowadays, there's only a small watercourse left, hidden in the reed that I'm following now with my kayak. This is one reason for having it on board anyway. By coming further north, the effect of the uplift of the land will increase. I'm curious what awaits me on the Åland-islands. What had Espen Jessen told me about it?
Once you start going in the smaller areas between Sweden and Finland, you will actually still find nautical charts where you've got a big patch and say don't sail here unless you know the area. And that's still in the charts today because there are so many little rocks and skerries and everything that you just, it doesn't make sense putting them in a chart. And in those areas you still have local pilots that need to know the whole area by heart and not just by chance.
And due to the uplift, there really is a passage on the Åland-islands which is not charted anywhere. There, I will have to find my own way without the help of a pilot. But all in good time. I'm waiting for a shift and a decreasing force of the wind overnight, which is typical for the archipelago. And that exactly happens, and I start a wonderful passage by crossing the Viking. With winds blowing from the back, I'm drifting in the vicinity of islands and steep rocky shores, reminding me of the Mediterranean Sea. In 2014, I even spotted a seal in this beautiful corner of the Baltic, because there are big sheltered areas for these animals. The land around the Viking was already settled since the early ages. It is said that in the beginning of the Viking Age, a king of the Swedes defeated the Danish king here with the help of Odin.
Winterklasen.
It is still an awesome feeling to be underway on the traces of history. And as written in the itinerary, after sailing 4 Växjö, I'm entering another archipelago.
Yeah, one big topic on such a long journey are the supplies, mostly with food. And I just try to remember when I did my last big buyings. I guess it was in Karlskrona, so 14 days ago. And in between there are just small food stores, but off-season not only very expensive, but also the choices quite like East Germany during the 80s, so very limited. And this is why I'm here in Lidköping. It's a bit offside the route, but there's a big German discounter, and I will now go there and resupply for the next 14 days.
Starting here, the route splits up in 2, sometimes even 3 parallel passages. This can be a bit confusing and makes it a tough task to visit all mentioned waypoints. Is it because the knowledge of different seafarers had been accumulated in this document? Or maybe, like I am expecting it right now, was also caused by the lack of supplies?
The inner route could have served the purpose to gather provisions for the entire fleet and was destined for maneuverable vessels that could operate under oars, like the Snacker, basically long ships that would have resembled the Viking long ships in many respects. So not much was different. They had the advantage that they were very maneuverable. They could be operated under oars and under sails, and you could go deep into rivers and deep into the inner archipelagos. And that the outer route was meant to be sailed by the large, sturdy sailing vessels. Cox had the advantage to have a much greater cargo carrying capacity, and you can of course transport many more horses on such vessels, and they were used in long distance trade, so they had a clear advantage, but they were sturdy sailing vessels and could not operate in every maritime environment.
And so many cogs were lost in the archipelagos, like the famous Cookmaren wreck, which still today lies underwater in the Bight of Cookmaren, which will be on my way later. But for the time being, I need to escape the hectically haste of the city. With all my tanks and supplies filled up, it is now me who is in need for some relaxing before starting the next big leg of my journey.
Aale.
And relaxing comes easy on the island of Broken, surrounded by the wildest nature. The island absolutely wants to be explored, and I'm having my eyes everywhere. I'm decided to continue my experiments on the sundial compass of the Vikings and start to create something out of the woods washed ashore. But making a flat disc becomes a real challenge with the help of my tools. Trying the following experiment, which I did at the 20th of March, is a great help in understanding the sundial compass. Because this exact date marks the equal length of days and nights, the so-called equinox. By connecting these points casted by the shadow of a rod on these special days, one gets a line in perfect east-westerly direction, thus making it easy to find the exact northerly direction. And what would happen if my position would be more to the north or south? Exactly, the line will be parallelly shifted. But the Vikings were not only experts in sun-assisted navigation, but also had a history as neatly louds. The compass always around, and butter lubricates the hair for an improved styling. And me, meanwhile now also getting in the Viking mood, lose my sense of time and enjoying an exaggerated personal hygiene. Because it's a Saturday, which even in some modern Scandinavian languages has the meaning bathing day. On my tour over the island, I discover a sauna with a great sea view, where I am once more all alone. But this will soon find an end now, every day coming closer to Stockholm and the summer holidays. And so I remember all the days and miles now lying behind me. I'm thinking of my departure in Haitabu, now only 4 weeks ago. It already feels like an eternity. Followed by the long passage to Sweden, to Korseberga, and over the Bight of Hanö to the starting point of the old route in Utlängan. The endless Kalmar Sound and the entrance to the archipelagos are passing in my mind. All the islands, the anchorages and long nights. I'm full of luck about everything I had experienced so far, and I'm really looking forward for the coming month at sea. I just could not be happier. My outboard engine is humming the next morning, and I'm gliding through calm waters and endless summer days, eastward towards new adventures.